What's going on, guys? Today I'm showing you how I built a shadow box to display Pokemon tins for my brothers for Christmas for under $50. Let's get started. I first came up with this idea when I saw this listing on eBay and noticed that the tins had cool connecting artwork. It was only $30, which is kind of a steal, so I went ahead and picked it up. And in only a couple of days, the package arrived. For some reason, the package came with like 20 layers of saran wrap, but it wasn't a big problem. In total, we got 8 cool looking tins, 8 very nice Cosmo Hollows, 8 coins, and 8 art cards, which I'm definitely keeping for myself to frame in the future. Now it's time to begin building, starting with step number 1, which is measuring and sketching. I started off by taking some measurements of the tin to help with the design. I then wrote it down, and the tin ended up being 4.9 inches by 3 inches by 1 inch. Next, I made a rough sketch along with some measurements. I also wanted to include splines because they look nice and they also add support. Moving on to step number 2, where we can begin cutting the wood. For this project, I'm using some oak and pine that I found in my garage. First, I measured using a measuring tape and quickly marked out where I needed to cut the wood. We can move over to my table saw, which I'm using for almost all the cutting in this project. I then cut all of my pieces to the right size. Next, I'm switching the angle of the blade to be 45 degrees to connect the corners evenly. I then just ran the pieces through again, shaving a corner off each time. And here I'm doing the same thing but to the longer pieces. And this is how the box was looking so far, and it's starting to come along pretty well. This brings us to our next step, which is cutting plexiglass in the back. I didn't have any plexiglass or particle board, so I had to go to Home Depot to get some. I managed to find particle board for $6, but the cheapest plexiglass that I could find was $90. Instead, my dad suggested to go to Value Village and buy a picture frame with plexiglass in it. It ended up only costing $11, which is way cheaper. Once again, I'm measuring and marking where I need to cut. Remember, measure twice, cut once. I then cut both the particle board and plexiglass with my table saw, which was surprisingly easy. And here's what they looked like. Next, I'm marking where I need to cut so that the glass and back both fit properly. Another 2 rounds through the table saw. And here's how everything's looking. Now, for my favorite step, staining. Before I started, I quickly sanded all of the wood down to get an even coating of stain. For this project, I decided to use Bear's Espresso Wood Stain color. I'm covering the workstation in paper towels so I don't accidentally stain it. I'm also going to be wearing gloves and using a cotton towel to spread the stain. When staining, be sure to evenly coat the wood, wiping off any excess and reapplying where it's needed. Make sure not to miss any spots. As you can see, the wood is starting to look very nice, and I really like this color. Just staining the last side here. And we're done. Now it's time to move on to step number 5, which is painting the back. We're going to be doing another quick round of sanding. Then putting on our first layer of paint. The paint that I'm using today is charcoal matte spray paint, which I think turned out great. Now the second coat. And we just have to wait for it to dry now. And this is how the back turned out. Our next step is step number 6, which is gluing the box. I started by laying out the pieces, then attaching tape to the joints. This made the process much easier as I already had some support holding the box together. I then just smeared some wood glue in between the joints and then connected them. Here I'm adding the plexiglass. And then clamping everything all together. Now we're on to step number 7, which is making the splines. I first cut a thin strip of wood with my table saw, and I promise, this is the last time I use it. I then marked where I needed to cut using a chisel and then sawed a gap open. Next, I applied some wood glue and gently tapped the spline into place using a wooden hammer. I unfortunately lost the video where I cut the splines, but I made some marks, so I'm just reapplying stain with a Q-tip to fix it. And here's how the splines look, and I think that they turned out pretty well. Now we're on to one of our last and most important steps, which is assembly. I first laid all the tins out, making sure that they were positioned correctly. Took the back off all the tins, and guess what? They have the same artwork, which is pretty cool. I then used some double-sided tape to attach the tins to the back, cutting to size and taping to each side. Same thing for the other box. And here's how they turned out. I also attached a hanger to the back in case my brothers ever wanted to hang the box. I'm just tapping it into place with my hammer, then making a slot for it to fit with my chisel. Next, I started nailing in the back on both boxes. And with that, we're finally done making the box, meaning it's time for the... Since this is a Christmas gift, we still have one final step, which is wrapping. I'm not going to explain this one much because I'm sure you all know how to do this. There's some cutting, folding, and taping. Same thing for the other box. Adding some stickers. And we're done. Now we still haven't done anything with the Cosmo Hollows, so I decided to make a custom pack for them. I guess that this can be the bonus step. I'm going to be designing these packs on my computer. Let me just create a new Google drawing and then start searching for nice photos to use. Once I find a photo that I like, I just copy and paste it into my drawing. I'm repeating this for Leafeon, Flareon, and Vaporeon. Next, I spent some time formatting my word art so it looked nice. Then I found a nice looking background on Google and copied it onto my drawing. Repeating these steps for the other pack. And it's time to print. I'm quickly cutting the paper to the right size. Then coloring the edges with the black Sharpie. And carefully gluing the pack together. To make the crimps, I'm using what I think is a blade piece, which worked surprisingly well. Same thing for the other pack. And here's how they look. I'm pretty proud of how they turned out. And that is the end of today's video. Please consider subscribing or liking this video if you enjoyed, as it took me a very long time to make. Also, feel free to write a comment on what you guys thought. Thank you for watching, and peace.